My parents forced me to sign a felony financial confession at 18 to protect my older brother's Ivy League future, then wiped their hands of me with a $4 bus ticket out of Boston. For 12 years, I was the ghost in their tax records, the error code they deleted from the family portrait. But 3 days ago, Stephen and Eleanor Vance walked into my venture capital firm with a squad of attorneys and a file that made my blood run cold. They didn't come to look at my face. They came to strip my database, demanding I surrender my proprietary trading algorithms to bail out their bleeding hedge fund. My father stood there, gold Rolex catching the fluorescent light, and didn't even ask if I was alive. He placed a hand on my desk, leaned in, and whispered, "You are still our property, Austin, and everything you built belongs to the name you disgraced." They thought they could use my past to blackmail my present. They thought the terrified teenager on the rainy platform was still waiting for their permission to exist. They were wrong. Behind my calm smile was a 12-year paper trail, a master-level financial trap, and the cold reality that I was about to execute the final audit of their lives. Before I show you how I turned their $22 million legacy into absolute zero, tell me where you are listening from and if you've ever had to destroy a bloodline to save your own life. Let me establish the math of my childhood. In the Vance household, love wasn't a feeling. It was a return on investment. My brother Julian was the blue-chip asset. He had the perfect teeth, the Ivy League trajectory, and the effortless charisma that my father could parade in front of the board directors at Apex Crest Group. I was the operational expense. I had a stutter that made my father's jaw tighten during dinner parties, and a quiet obsession with data structures that Eleanor called antisocial behavior. The night everything changed, I was 18. Julian had taken the family sedan without permission, completely drunk, and crashed it straight into a commercial storefront downtown, causing $60,000 in property damage and breaking a pedestrian's collarbone. If the police report went through with his name, his Harvard admission was dead. The family legacy was dead. I remember the smell of leather and expensive scotch in my father's study 2 hours later. The ticking of his silver mechanical stopwatch on the mahogany desk felt like a countdown. Tick, tick, tick. "Austin," my mother said, her fingers perfectly manicured around a crystal glass. "Julian has a future. You have your numbers. The firm will handle the legal fees. You will serve an 18-month probation as a minor. It won't touch your record permanently if you stay clean. And if I say no," my voice cracked. My father pressed the top of the stopwatch. The ticking stopped. "Then you don't live under this roof. You don't use our name. And we will let the bank foreclose on your grandmother's house." They didn't give me a choice. They gave me a contract. I signed the confession. The next morning, there was no tearful goodbye. My father drove me to the South Station bus terminal, handed me a single $4 ticket to Maine, and a Bokta folder containing my severed financial ties. He didn't look at my eyes. He looked at his watch. "Don't come back until you are an asset, Austin." I sat on that bus for 7 hours, my hands trembling against the cold window. I didn't cry. I stared at the numbers on my bus ticket. $4. That was the price they put on my life. I memorized that number. It became the foundation of everything I did next. For the first 5 years in Portland, Maine, I lived in a room that smelled like damp cardboard. I worked 90 hours a week, cleaning the server rooms of an accounting firm at night, and learning algorithmic trading during the day from discarded textbooks I found in library dumpsters. I didn't have a family, so I made friends with variables. Data didn't lie to me. Data didn't trade me for a better son. By 28, I had developed a predictive valuation matrix that caught the attention of a boutique tech fund. 2 years later, I owned Vance Quantitative Systems. We weren't Wall Street giants, but we were precise. We operated out of a restored brick warehouse in Boston's Seaport, less than 2 miles from my father's high-rise office. I never called them. I never checked their website. Then came the first warning sign. It was a Tuesday morning, exactly 8:15 a.m. A transaction alert popped up on my personal terminal. A shell company named Crestway Holdings had attempted to execute a hostile micro-acquisition of our primary server host. I pulled the registration data. The beneficial owner was hidden behind 3 layers of Delaware LLCs. But the bank routing code led straight to the private clearinghouse of Apex Crest Group, my father's firm. They weren't trying to buy me out. They were trying to locate where my proprietary code was hosted. 2 days later, my office door swung open without a knock. Stephen Vance walked in, followed by Eleanor and a senior partner from their legal firm. My mother looked around my open-plan office with an expression of deep disgust. "Cute," she said, tapping her designer handbag against my assistant's desk. "A bit rustic, but I suppose it suits you. Austin?" My father started, his voice booming with that false authority I used to fear. "We need to talk about your current infrastructure. Apex Crest is restructuring its tech portfolio. We are taking over your proprietary matrix. We've already drawn up the asset transfer agreements." I didn't stand up. I kept my hands flat on my desk, my fingers tracing the edge of my keyboard. "You don't own any equity here, Stephen. Get out of my building." My father laughed, a dry metallic sound. He dropped a thick envelope onto my desk. Inside were copies of my 18-year-old felony probation records, along with a newly minted corporate compliance complaint, alleging that my trading software was built using trade secrets stolen from Apex Crest during my brief teenage employment there. "If this hits the press," Eleanor smiled, her eyes cold as ice, "your current Series A funding round is dead. The institutional investors won't touch a firm run by a convicted felon who steals from his own parents. We built you, Austin. We can dismantle you before lunch." They left the paper on my desk like a execution warrant. They thought they had backed me into the dark corner again. They didn't know that for 12 years, I had been studying the exact mechanism of their shadow funds. The pressure didn't hit me in my chest. It hit my system. Within 48 hours, 2 of my major liquidity providers called meetings to evaluate our ongoing partnership. The tech blog Boston Ledger received an anonymous tip regarding a pending intellectual property lawsuit against my firm. The wolves were at the door, and my parents were pulling the strings from their Beacon Hill mansion. I stayed in my office for 36 hours straight. My assistant left 3 cups of coffee on my desk. They all went cold. I wasn't panicked. I was zooming in. I was watching the transaction logs of Apex Crest's main fund. And that's when I saw the real blood in the water. Apex Crest wasn't trying to expand. They were suffocating. They had over-leveraged 40% of their capital into an offshore real estate development that had completely collapsed 3 weeks prior. They were short on liquid cash by nearly $30 million. If they couldn't secure my algorithmic matrix to automate high-frequency trades and spoof their quarterly reports, their entire fund would face a mandatory federal audit by the end of the month. At midnight on Friday, my phone buzzed on the glass desk. A restricted number. I picked it up. I didn't say hello. "Austin?" The voice was strained, heavy with exhaustion. It wasn't my father. It was Julian. "Julian?" I said, my voice completely level. "You're on the wrong line. Listen to me," my brother whispered. The sound of car engines humming in the background. "They're going to use your name again, Austin. Dad didn't just open Crestway Holdings last year. He opened 6 foreign accounts in your name, using your old signature from the legal confession files. They've shifted over $14 million in toxic liability into accounts that carry your social security number. If Apex Crest goes under, the IRS isn't coming for Dad. They're coming for the felon on the paperwork. They're coming for you." The room went completely silent. My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles turned white. "Why are you telling me this, Julian?" I asked. "You're the golden boy. You're the heir. A bitter laugh came through the speaker. The heir? Austin? I haven't slept without pills since I was 20. Dad has a tracking app on my phone. He controls my mortgage. I didn't crash that car because I was partying. I crashed it because I wanted to hit something solid enough to stop his voice in my head. I'm not the asset, Austin. I'm just the expensive bait. I'm sending you the encrypted drive containing the internal ledger. Use it. Tear the house down. Just don't leave me inside it. The file arrived in my inbox 3 minutes later. It wasn't just a spreadsheet. It was an execution catalog. Stephen and Eleanor hadn't just abandoned me. They had built a financial shield out of my shadow, ready to blow it up the moment their empire cracked. The annual New England Investors Summit was held at the Grand Ballroom of the Mandarin Oriental in Boston. It was the premier event for the city's financial elite. My father was scheduled to give the keynote address at 2 p.m. on ethical capital allocation in the digital age. I arrived at 1:45 p.m. I didn't wear a casual tech outfit. I wore a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than my father's entire monthly allowance to Julian. I walked in with my legal counsel and 3 independent forensic auditors from a top-tier global accounting firm. Stephen Vance was standing near the stage, surrounded by 2 managing directors from the Federal Reserve and the chief investment officer of Boston's largest pension fund. He saw me walking down the center aisle, and his smile faltered for a fraction of a second before recovering its smooth, oily texture. "Austin," my father said loudly, projecting his voice for the surrounding executives. "I'm glad you made it. Are you here to finally sign the corporate partnership papers we discussed?" I stopped exactly 3 feet from him. I didn't look at his colleagues. I pulled out my silver mechanical stopwatch, the exact duplicate of the one he used to control my childhood, and pressed the top button. Tick, tick, tick. "Stephen," I said, my voice echoing off the high ceiling. "Your speech has been canceled. The board of Apex Crest just stripped you of your executive authority 5 minutes ago." The managing directors stepped back, their faces freezing. Eleanor appeared from the side corridor, her eyes widening as she saw the folders in my auditor's hands. "What is the meaning of this insolence?" My father hissed, dropping his voice to a dangerous whisper. "Get this garbage out of my face." This garbage is a certified forensic transmission sent directly to the New York Regional Office of the Internal Revenue Service and the Enforcement Division of the SEC, I said, handing a Barkta folder to the chief investment officer standing next to him. As of 1:30 p.m. today, Crestway Holdings has been identified as a fraudulent shell entity. The $14 million in offshore liabilities you tried to mask under my identity have been legally rerouted back to your personal Social Security numbers, backed by the full internal ledger, signed and verified by your Chief Operational Officer, Julian Vance. My mother let out a sharp gasp, her hand flying to her throat. My father's face drained of color so fast he looked like a corpse in a designer suit. "Julian wouldn't do that," Eleanor muttered, her voice trembling. "He knows what's at stake. Julian is currently at the federal building providing testimony," I said, stepping closer until I could see the sweat breaking out on my father's forehead. "You told me 12 years ago to never come back until I was an asset." "Well, I'm not an asset, Stephen. I am the auditor. And your fund is completely insolvent." Before he could speak, 2 men in dark suits from the Federal Marshal's Service entered through the back doors of the ballroom. They didn't make a scene. They just stood by the exits, waiting for my father to step down from the stage he had spent 40 years building. The collapse of Apex Crest Group took exactly 48 days. The federal courts froze every asset connected to Stephen and Eleanor Vance. Their Beacon Hill home was placed into federal receivership to pay off outstanding tax penalties. The final judgment was delivered last week, a $22 million liquidation order, a permanent ban from the financial services industry, and a criminal trial date set for early winter. My parents tried to call me 24 times from their attorney's burner lines. I didn't pick up once. They sent a letter through their legal defense team begging for an injection of emergency capital from my firm, promising to sign an absolute waiver of any future claims. I sent them a single response through my lawyer. It contained a copy of my old bus ticket from South Station to Maine, with a note written in my own hand. Take care of it. 2 months ago, Julian moved into a small apartment 3 blocks from my office. He doesn't work in finance anymore. He teaches algebra to high school kids at a charter school in East Boston. He looks thin, and his hands still shake sometimes when he reaches for his coffee. But he smiles when he sees my team. Every Sunday, we sit on my deck overlooking the harbor, eating cheap takeout and talking about nothing that has to do with money or contracts. We are learning how to be brothers without a stopwatch ticking between us. My mother tried to approach Julian at his school last week, looking for money to pay her defense attorneys. He didn't look at her blazer, which was no longer cream-colored but stained from the rain. He just told her that his family was currently busy and walked back inside the building. They thought that when they discarded me, my world would stop spinning. They thought they could control the direction of my life by keeping me in the dark. But they forgot that numbers don't have emotions. They forgot that when you train a child to look at the world through the cold lens of survival, you shouldn't be surprised when he grows up to audit your entire existence. So if the family that traded your dignity for a pristine reputation came crawling back only when their own house started burning down, would you hand them an extinguisher, or would you let the math finish its work? Thank you for listening to this account. This story is a dramatized narrative created for entertainment and reflection. It stands as a reminder that your worth is never defined by those who see you as a transaction, and that the strongest foundation you can ever build is the one made of your own truth.